I've completed 18 sketchbooks in the last 5 years. I'm always switching things up, trying new mediums, so I have a big collection of art supplies. Today we're going through everything, all the pros and cons, so you can decide what art supplies are best for you and which are worth it for the type of art that you want to create. A lot of incredible artists have made videos comparing the technical qualities of different art supplies. Shana at Caution Artist at Play and Lindsay the Frugal Crafter have made amazing videos on that. However, this video isn't that. We're exploring how each particular art supply works in practice, on the day-to-day, and how each compares to other brands. This is going to be fast-paced. Everything is sorted into categories which you can find in the chapters below. We've got a lot to get through. This is crazy. Let's start with paint. The very first set of watercolors I got are these, which I'm sure are not that price anymore. It's the Winsor & Newton Cotman little starter pack. Honestly, so cute. If you buy watercolor in a pan like this rather than the tubes, they can move about. Honestly, this is a really good starter set, but it does get very messy. The way that it's built, you get a lot of mess in between these little gaps, and it can damage the paintbrush because it's going in these tiny little holes. Winsor & Newton Cotman is actually a really good range, especially in the UK because it's so cheap. So if you're after some good cheap watercolors, I would definitely check these out if you're in the UK. To be honest though, they are just student grade, and any similar option for a similar price in the country you're located will probably do the same job. This is where I keep all of my watercolor tubes, and there's a lot. I have lots of vintage tubes like this, and then I also got newer ones, the really big sets like this that I love. Unfortunately though, these old tubes have like no details on them at all. Cotman isn't what it used to be, particularly the Van Dyke Brown and Mauve. One thing I did notice is that they do crack a lot in the pan, especially the newer formulations. That being said, they are student grade, and of course there's going to be cons. This here is my main palette, and as you can see, there are a lot of Winsor & Newton paints, mostly because this is the cheapest brand that I can get in the UK. These little 8mm tubes are about £3, but if you're based in the US, not sure it's worth the big hike in price. Winsor & Newton also have a professionals line. They're a bit of an odd size. They're like in between the 21 and the little ones. I have a couple of these, and I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't think the pro tubes are worth the price jump. There really isn't that much of a noticeable difference between them. I will say though, the professionals don't crack in the pan. That's the only real practical difference that I've noticed. They do have more pigment, but that doesn't mean it's immediately better. A lot of artists like working in thin layers, and having that extra pigment doesn't really mean much because it's going to get watered down anyway. Honestly, save the money, go for the Cotman. This is the huge set of tubes that I'm talking about. And next up is Schmincke. Potter's Pink is the most iconic shade by them. Though another notable mention is Helio Turquoise. These shades are pretty unique to Schmincke. These are the best option out there for granulation. If you're the kind of person that likes using watercolor in a messy way with lots of water, lots of paint, then these are perfect for you. Holbein. These are pricey, and honestly, I didn't notice much difference. The biggest thing that Holbein like to do is add the white pigment to their paints. When you're looking for pigment numbers like this, the B stands for blue, and 27 is what makes up Prussian blue. In order to really get your money's worth, the best thing you can do is buy singular pigment tubes and then mix the colors yourself. If you're buying a paint that has a ton of different pigments in, it's already quite muddy before you even start mixing. And if you notice a PW6, that's white. So if you like to use watercolor in a transparent way with lots of layers, be careful of those Holbein paints. However, Holbein do also make lovely unique shades, but as I say, often those lovely pastel colors are also colors that you can easily mix yourself. So yes, they're lovely as a treat, but no, you really don't need them. Oh, okay, moving on to the fanciest one, Daniel Smith. These three are the most unique Daniel Smith shades. Moonglow, nobody else makes, it's iconic. Cascade Green and Mayan Blue Genuine. Generally, when you're going for Daniel Smith, they do have more granulation, especially the Primatech ones, but they're also really unique shades, and a lot of these colors you can't get anywhere else. So if you're gonna treat yourself and just get a few tubes, try and go for the unique ones that you can't get anywhere else, that are only on Daniel Smith. Daniel Smith is fancy. It's probably the best paint in the US, but if you're based in Europe, they are far more expensive than the US. These are Shinhan. I have two colors and I wasn't super impressed. There's not a lot of pigment. They are cheaper than Daniel Smith. I wouldn't really recommend these unless you find them much cheaper. They are good for what they are, but I would say that they're a little bit more student grade personally, unless you get a good deal. Next up, the tubes that are actually a different color and easy to find. These are Magello Mission Gold, and I actually chose these two as a dupe for Holbein. Magello do also mix white into a lot of their colors. I bought Naples Yellow and Shell Pink because I think they had pretty much the same pigment as the Holbein version, and yet they were cheaper. If there's any colors from Holbein that you particularly like, these are a good cheap alternative, a good dupe for Holbein. Next up is M. Graham. I only have the one, sadly. These are pretty expensive outside of the US. Gamboge in particular is a really lovely shade. These tubes do have honey in them. They can be a little bit more likely to go moldy. As with watercolor, just make sure that you always allow your palette to fully dry before closing the lid. Next up is Rembrandt by Royal Talons. I wasn't super impressed, but then again, these are student grade. It's the same brand that makes the art creation sketchbooks, but if you're based in the US, then a starter set of these would be a good option. They're also a little bit bigger. These are 20 mils. This next brand is a big one. If you've been on my channel for a while, you know I have a bit of an obsession with the Jackson Art own brand watercolors. These are actually really good. Unfortunately, everyone else knows about it now, so they've gone up in price. Oh, I've also got a neutral tint by Schmincke. These are all my student grade ones that I use for my outside plein air palette. And I also popped some of the cheaper paints in here. As you can tell, this is just my sketchbook one. Often with cheaper tubes, you don't know the light fast rating, so I wouldn't use them for originals, but it really doesn't matter what paint you put in a sketchbook. This one here is my main palette. Loads of different brands here, and I actually stuck in some extra ones because I wanted to use some new paints. It looks messy, but I find this way less messy than having all of the separate pans. Also, we've got the Kuretake Gensai Tambi. These absolutely gorgeous paints. They're fun, they have some really lovely colors. Not really the most sensible option. A lot of the sets don't really have primary colors that you can easily mix. Also, because these are opaque watercolors, they're not really intended to be mixed. They can easily look muddy. So these are just like a fun treat palette. That's kind of how I see them. Definitely good as a Christmas present. Honestly, aside from these, when it comes to watercolor, there really isn't much difference between brands. The biggest difference is between student grade and artist grade, and whether you want granulation or not. With watercolor, you always want to prioritize the paper, then the paint, and then the paintbrushes. The other fun one that I wanted to touch on are these metallic watercolors that I got. They were just cheap ones from Amazon. Honestly, these are really good. I haven't tried those super expensive ones, but these are very opaque. I completely recommend these if you want to try some metallics out without spending a fortune. Next up is gouache. This is my Himi Jelly Gouache palette. This went moldy. I tried to save them, I couldn't. I had to bin a load of them. The rest kind of looked okay. And then I just opened it up. Wow, these are moldy too. Isn't that fun? Honestly, once it's gone, it's gone. I don't think there's much more I can do with that. Jelly gouache is a great starter set. If you don't know how to use gouache, this is the easiest way to figure it out. But as you saw, it can easily go moldy. There are videos videos on here to find out how to avoid it, like using distilled water. You can add white vinegar, I think it is. But if you live in a humid climate, there is just that big risk that it could go moldy. As I said with watercolor, make sure it fully dries and then close the lid. You can't do that with jelly gouache because then it will dry up and crack, and that defeats the entire point. You are keeping it moist and closing the lid and then just hoping it won't go moldy. As long as you get a cheap set and are comfortable with that, they're a lot of fun. Moving on to this disastrous palette I made. This is gouache. I made a palette using tubes and it cracked and went everywhere. You can see that some colors fared a lot worse than others. It's been like 2 years, maybe 3 years, and do you see that? This one color here is kind of wet. This is allowed to fully dry. It's supposed to be used as a dry palette, and this one is wet. Winsor & Newton Indigo, okay? That's the shade that you want. If you have any gouache tubes, this is the one that you want. That one is so good. It's still wet somehow. Most of these are all Winsor & Newton. Don't fill the entire pans like this because it cracks. Use them straight from the tube. Don't try and make a palette like I did. There is one Schmincke. Didn't crack as much, but I didn't notice much difference. There's also a Holbein. Didn't notice much difference. This green is De La Rowney. It's decades old. It's actually a vintage one, and honestly, other than it kind of crumbling and going a little bit powdery, this has stayed up pretty well. But yeah, the De La Rowney lasted a while. The palettes that I use are these. They are cheap and cheerful. Yes, they could easily break. They are just cheap plastic, but I haven't had any do that. As long as you're pretty careful, I don't think they break as easily as you'd think. Watercolor tubes are more cost effective if you know you like watercolor and you know you're going to be using it for a while, because these wells are bigger than half pans and you'll be able to fill them up multiple times. You can have multiple palettes, you can have themes, you can mix your own colors. If that's something you're into, then these are great. They hold a lot of paint. With that big gouache palette, I deliberately chose a flat one because I knew that it was going to crack and I didn't want it to go into the other wells, but I just didn't think it would crack that much. These wells never need to be topped up as much as you'd think, so you're better off getting a small one that's a really good size, and just top it up when you need to. It's honestly not very often. Okay, finally, moving on. These are most of my paintbrushes. This is a lot, and I didn't buy most of these. Some of them were handed down, some of them people had just found and gave to me. Some of them I got from Facebook Marketplace. That crazy haul is now up on my channel. When it comes to brushes, there's two things to consider: whether you want synthetic or animal hair. This brush here is real squirrel hair. This is the only animal hair brush that I own. It really is the softest brush you'll ever feel, and it's perfect for watercolor because that means it will hold a lot of water, so it's perfect for those big flat washes at the very beginning. Also, because it's soft, if you're the kind of person that likes doing glazes or really light layers later on in your painting, a soft brush like this is unlikely to disrupt the layers underneath, but obviously it is animal hair. On the other hand, we have synthetic, which is plastic. You have to decide whether you're okay using an animal hair brush and having it last longer, or getting plastic and disposing of the plastic ones sooner. Unfortunately though, because this is a mop brush, I'm actually losing a lot of the hair. I think a little bit of water got in here and separated a bit, so this brush is shrinking. It's so much smaller than it used to be, and I don't know what I can do about it because of the way that it's been tied up here. For watercolor, the two best brands are Princeton and Silver Black Velvet. I chose Princeton because it was a lot easier to get in the UK, but they are still very expensive over here, sadly. That's also something to consider. They are good and I would get more, but unfortunately the shipping costs just as much as the brush. This brush set here, I actually got sent by ChantelleArts, and I actually made a TikTok for them. Then I made an entire review video on YouTube. They didn't know that I was going to make that, so it's completely honest. These are all synthetic squirrel hair, so these are a really good alternative to animal hair, and I leave the video down below because that has everything in it. They are good, and this set is actually what made me realize that I like mop brushes the most. They just hold a lot more paint than round brushes, but there is a little bit of a learning curve with mop brushes. Speaking of, I have this mop or little quill brush that I got. The entire name has come off, but it says Jackson's Art there. It is literally just an own brand quill paintbrush. These are cheap and they're really good. I'll leave the link down below if you want to get one of these brushes, because I've spoken about them a lot before and it's always hard to describe exactly what it is. It's really simple, but they are really good. All of these black ones are from the same set that I got from Amazon called Nick Pro, and I'll leave that one down below as well. These are also synthetic squirrel. That is generally the type that I like to go for watercolor. These are really good. They're really soft considering how cheap these were. Every single black round is from this set. But I did look at every review before getting these, so I knew that they were going to be good. So the fancy ones we mentioned are what I use for watercolor. These black ones I now use for gouache. And then I've got these cheap Daler Rowney ones. These are what I use for acrylic. Generally, I'm working slightly bigger when I use acrylics, and they're pretty good for the price. They are cheap in the UK. I think these would be similar to what you would get own brand in the US or somewhere. Obviously, these are not synthetic squirrel or anything because we don't want them to hold lots of water. With acrylics, it doesn't really matter how good the paintbrush is. You don't need fancy paintbrushes. Acrylics are quite a harsh medium. I mean, if you accidentally leave it on the paintbrush, it will just completely destroy it. Don't need to use your fancy paintbrushes for those. Keep them separate, use them for watercolor. Obviously, it looks like I own tons of paintbrushes, but you really don't need that many. They're really just what I've gathered over the years. But if you watch the scene series, you'll see that I only really use 1 or 2 paintbrushes. That's pretty much all I use for watercolor. A lot of people will reach for a small round brush for those little details. I find it easier using a mop and trying to hold it to a fine point, but that's really up to you. The only reason to have lots of paintbrushes is so that you can use different ones for different mediums. This one here is for cyanotyping. I've also got the big orange ones. These are for gesso and varnish or decoupage, because you really don't want to be putting glue through your favorite brushes. Starting out, I just get 3 brushes per medium, a big, medium and small. Acrylic and gouache can use the same paintbrushes. Just make sure to keep your watercolor separate. And with all of that, we can move on to color pencils. This is the pencil case that me and my partner share. It's mostly full of Faber-Castell Polychromos and Caran d'Ache Luminance. Faber-Castell Polychromos are oil-based, so they come to a lovely fine point. These are best for details, but honestly, I mostly use these to add to watercolor just to bring in some of those details that got a little bit lost. They are simple to use, but they are quite brittle and the lead can snap quite easily because it is very hard. Great for beginners, but also some artists create absolute masterpieces with these, and I think these are similar to Prismacolor, but I actually don't have any because they're quite hard to get in the UK. You just don't know if they're going to be legit. Notable shades are this one, Cappy Morton Violet, this tiny little Prussian blue, and also the Payne's Grey is very good. Then we've got all of these ones, Caran d'Ache Luminance, and firstly this colour, Spring Green. You've absolutely got to get it, it's gorgeous. For starters, the colour selection is stunning. This ultramarine violet is such a gorgeous, unique shade. Look how bright the ultramarine is. And I also recommend the Flame Red. So vibrant. The big difference between the Caran d'Ache Luminance and the Faber-Castell is that these ones are wax-based. They're better to be used as a base. If you're only using colour pencils, you would pop down the wax first, layer, burnish, and then pop the oil-based one on top for those details. But also these are great for sketching. If I want to reach for a pencil and do a sketch in the Daily Doodle Diary, it will always be one of these. They have this scratchy feel that's really satisfying, but then if you press down really hard, it kind of feels like butter. Very versatile, but the edges aren't very smooth, so that's where the oil is better for the details, for line work. Though there is one more now. These you've probably seen everywhere all over YouTube. These are the Hoo oil-based color pencils. This is a 72 pack and it's absolutely huge. You have every color you could need. These ones are oil-based like the polychromos, but the lead isn't as hard, so it does feel a little bit softer, a little bit closer to the luminance ones. They're not the same as either of them. With these three, if you're like me and tend to do a messy sketch in graphite and then do color pencils on top and rub the whole thing out, Caran d'Ache Luminance, it's permanent. The color pencil will never erase. Ohuhu is again somewhere in the middle. The lines end up a little bit lighter. The Faber-Castell Polychromos are better, but this is the price difference. I don't know if the Faber-Castells are worth that huge price difference. The Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils are completely different and I'll still be getting those. But of course the Ohuhu ones, whilst they do have light fastness ratings, we don't know how thorough they are compared to those bigger, fancier brands. The first color pencil set I got were actually these. These are very much student grade. I don't know where the rest have gone. I thought these were good at the time, but there's a huge difference between artist grade color pencils and student grade. You're much better off getting a smaller set of fancy color pencils and learning how to mix your own colors than getting a bigger student set. Once me and my partner tried the fancy pencils, we have not gone back to those. Color pencils have a huge limit on what you can do with the art supplies you've got. You could create amazing pieces with cheap art supplies. A lot of artists on YouTube have, but it's not fun and you're making it a million times more difficult. Another one I do want to talk about are these Faber-Castell erasable color pencils. I got these because they're cheaper than the Coloraze pencils here in the UK, like significantly cheaper, and you get a much bigger set as opposed to just having like red and blue. At the time I did my research, I watched a lot of review videos, and in those, these actually rubbed out better than those fancy ones. They work amazingly, they completely rub out, and I don't know why these don't get much recognition. The only Derwent pencils I've tried are these metallic water-soluble pencils, and honestly, they're actually really quite good. Don't use them with water, they're really useless with water. They don't show metallic in the slightest, but these are a little bit softer, so they feel closer to luminance. The lead is soft, and I can imagine that this is what Derwent is like, especially the super soft ones. Honestly though, there isn't really such a thing as a good metallic pencil. You're never gonna find a great one. But these are slightly softer and they're really quite fun to use. Whew. Moving on to acrylics and acrylic gouache. Honestly, I just use acrylics for fun, so I don't have any incredible acrylics, I don't have golden, I don't have Liquitex, I don't have any of those fancy ones. So what I do have, these ones by Reeves, these are a really good starter set, especially if you're in the UK, and these are my first set. I also have a load of these tiny little tubes by De La Rowney. These are student grade, and you have a ton of little colours. I think I got these when I was kind of scared to mix colours because I didn't know how. These little tubes, don't get them. They are much worse. They are transparent, they are student grade, but they're really not good. You're much better off getting something like these Peebo acrylics and then mixing your own colors. These were £2 each. It's a much cheaper way to do it than to get loads of little individual paints. Get a warm and a cool of each primary color and a white, and you'll be sorted. Unless you really love acrylics, there's no point getting expensive ones because these can also go off after a few years. Moving on to acrylic gouache. This is the master set by Holbein, and I picked this up in my birthday haul, which I'll leave the playlist down below if you want to check out any of the hauls. Looks good. I was really excited to use this. They really weren't as opaque as I was hoping that they would be because these are pricey. We painted the cover of a sketchbook together and you can really see how transparent these paints are. I leave that full video down below if you want to check it out because these are pretty transparent for the cost. The lovely unique pastel shades that Holbein make, these ones are actually really good. So I would recommend getting some lovely unique pastel shades if that's what you want to try. They are matte, they work like acrylic, so once they're down, they're down. They're not gonna budge. But because all of these have white mixed in, because they are lovely pastel shades, these are so opaque that you only need to get one layer down. So if you're the kind of person that likes to use negative space, or quickly fill a background, or use mixed media, add lots of mediums on top, pick out some fun colors. This is a much better route. We're gonna move on to a big one now. All of those acrylic markers. I think first up we'll compare the two that are ready to go. This pack by Artex, it's the 60B. Unfortunately, they don't have great names, so I'm just going to show you what it looks like. And also the Ohuhu Nuhuku brushes. Both of these are completely ready to go. This is the difference between them. As you can see, this one is tiny. I don't know why it's so small. I thought that when I opened it. These two are the most similar. Starting with the Artex ones, the biggest con with these is that they are quite dry. Even when you unbox them and use them the very first time, you can see just looking at it that that isn't super juicy. It does look like a pen, but it doesn't look thick like paint. It's a really fun set, but it could be completely dry within a year. I have heard people say about adding a little bit of water to these and that can bring them to life, but it's going to be even less opaque. I love that you get so many colors. The biggest positive with this set is that because they're kind of dry, they're not very juicy. It means when you're working in a sketchbook, it will dry a lot faster on the page, and it's better for kids because you don't have to worry about making a mess. If you're the kind of person that likes to work quickly, you don't have to worry so much about your hand going in the paint. They do pull at the paper a little bit. Use them in your sketchbook, you don't know when they're going to dry up. Comparing those to the Ohuhu ones, which they are most similar to, on the whole, these are better. They have a much better flow, but they're not very opaque at all. You can see just looking at the nib that has a lot more paint on it. These ones do take longer to dry, but they're a lot more gentle on the paper. The colors are very accurate to the lids, but the best part are these tiny little nibs. They go to such a fine point that it's almost like using a fine liner. Next up are these Sim Tap. These are unique in that there's not really anything like them. Lots of colors, and with these, you can see that you need to give them a really good shake. You can see it's pretty much completely dry. Oh, this is the weird one actually. Okay, so I got this in September, and this one here, it does not click. It's completely stopped, like the mechanism has broken. Also, this white one here, when I first got it, this one exploded. This one hasn't really worked well since. Sometimes it does come out the bottom. When you get these markers, you need to give them a really good shake and you need to really press down on the bottom. And having one or two faulty pens seems to be quite common with this set. They're also really unreliable and inconsistent. You pick a color, you go to use it, you have to shake it, you have to press down the bottom. The paint can either shoot out and go everywhere, or it doesn't come out at all. They completely separate, so every single one needs a good shake. First bit of paint that comes out of these will be a completely different color to the actual paint. However, saying all of that, these are the best opaque acrylic markers. None of these are running out, but unfortunately they are very high maintenance pens. They're not great for everyday use, but if you're planning on doing an entire sketchbook spread or painting an entire piece, these are the best acrylic markers. They just require a lot of maintenance. Next up, we've got the bullet nibs. These are the Artex bullet nibs. Again, they don't have a name. They look like this. And these are who don't have a name either. These ones are actually interesting because not only are they bullet nibs, they actually have almost like a fine liner tip. You get a big bullet like that. Both of these work the same as Posca, where you just press down the end a little bit and it flows through. But these ones also have a really fine version. And I've never seen a set like this before, where you get the exact same color in a different size. The Artex ones have a really lovely color selection. Lots of unique colors that you don't tend to get in these kind of sets. They don't have a great flow. They do feel a little bit more dried up, but they really do have some lovely colors. Just make sure you shake it beforehand and make sure you gesso the page beforehand rather than just going straight in onto paper, because it will probably tear it apart a little bit. The Ohuhu ones tear up the paper less. They are slightly bigger, so that could contribute to the slightly better flow. I think these are better, and that's not even considering that they come with basically a fine liner for every single color. Not a ton of colors, but obviously that's that's because it's halved. I have loads of these little Poscas and they are really good. This is where the acrylic markers came from. They basically created them, but they are super expensive. Like, this is the cost of the Artex set, and this is how much the Poscas cost. And usually the Poscas come in smaller sets, so you're paying more for a smaller set. It makes no sense. They were amazing 5 years ago, but in 2025, there are so many other brands making acrylic markers that it's just not worth spending this much for a Posca. Okay, now we're going to move on to alcohol markers. This is my big, beautiful stand that we painted together. These are all my Ohuhu markers. I actually started with the 48 set and now I've got the 120, so it fits it all perfectly. The only other markers I've tried are these typo ones. These are a bit odd because they're a pastel set and then they've got like really bright colors, but I got the smaller set for Christmas and figured out that I like these and then got the bigger one. I do really like these Ohuhu markers, but it was really surprising how quickly they dried up. Like, out of the 48, half of them were streaky within a year, and I kind of didn't expect that. It is both me and my partner using it though, but if you've had alcohol markers before and you know you like them, I'd get a bigger set than 48. Personally, I found that alcohol markers had a really steep learning curve. These are chisel and bullet, and these are brush and chisel. It's the Honolulu set, and you kind of need to try both to figure out what you like. Personally, I don't really think the bullet is necessary, so I prefer brush and chisel, but everyone is different. Although I will say the 12 set was a really good introduction, so if you've never tried them before, get a really small set, see if you like them, and then get a bigger set. The biggest water-based marker brand is Tombow. These are pretty iconic, and I've had this one for years and it still works perfectly. Got a lovely big brush and bullet nib. Unfortunately, these are very expensive now. They're like over £3 each where I live. They feel like a pen. They're not super juicy, but they are quite streaky considering how expensive they are. So I ended up getting a cheaper set from Temu. All of these, they look similar, they work similar. They don't have a very flexible nib, and you can see that it is kind of dried up. But I did take mine outside for the How Much Art Can I Make series, so I don't know if they dried up because they were kind of in the sun. When I first got these, I could hardly tell the difference, and they are a fraction of the cost. These are literally from Temu. I would just say get a small set just in case they all do dry up. Generally, if you choose to get a random white label set, you might have one that looks a little bit weird. They could dry up. They are quite high risk, but if you're only paying a fraction of the cost, they can be completely worth it. These all still work absolutely fine. I also picked up all of these fake mild liners when I did a big Shein haul, and these are really quite accurate. They can be high risk, they can be inconsistent, but if you just want some fun pens to use in your sketchbook, the white label markers are worth considering. Next, my new favorites. These Karen markers, I absolutely love these. They are fantastic, they're underrated, they are expensive. Like, look how juicy that is. You can just see it shine. Completely worth it. So much more juicy than the Tombows or any other water-based marker. I've also got these Staedtler markers. These are exactly the same format. They're a lovely brush, a little bit juicy as well. And these are a really good alternative to Tombow. If these happen to be cheaper in your country, they are very similar. They're completely worth it. It's all well and good saying which art supplies are better, but if you live somewhere where those are really expensive, you have to consider the alternatives. And with that, we're moving on to the sketchbooks. There are a lot, and I'm going to sort them out into 100% cotton and cellulose. As you can see, 100% cotton sketchbooks are hard to find, and it is a controversial topic. A lot of people swear by 100% cotton all the time, but I think there are uses for both. 100% cotton. First up, we've got the Paul Rubens. This is what I used for my very first 100 heads challenge. It's got a perforated edge here, so you can rip the pages out if you like. However, these only come in hot hot pressed. You can see it's very smooth, there isn't much texture. Usually hot press sketchbooks don't feel as much like 100% cotton. It's a really good starter sketchbook and a good introduction to 100% cotton. Next is my favorite, Cardi. It's 100% cotton, very easy to layer, easy to lift. It's really just the perfect sketchbook. It also doesn't warp very much. Like, that's pretty flat. I've also got this little one that I used for plein air painting, and I've actually strayed away from it because I found that the paper stayed wet for a while, which is great. But on days like this in January, the paper was not drying. So nowadays I actually choose cellulose when I'm outside. This is an etcher. I painted the cover. It looks really messy. It's a pretty good all-round sketchbook, but I did find the transfer to be a bit of an issue. However, it's a really good starter sketchbook. Unfortunately though, I did find this a bit too expensive. Like when I was starting out, I just didn't want to use it for quick sketchbook pieces and experiments and fun. You can see it's a lot more like a art book than a sketchbook. I don't make sketchbooks like this anymore because this one I was just too precious over. I also have a hot pressed one, which is the Scene Series sketchbook over there. Again, the hot pressed is very smooth, doesn't really work like 100% cotton, so get the cold press. I also have these single sheets of Cardi paper. This is what you'll see me use in the Create This book because the sheets are really quite thin, so it's not going to make the book really thick. I have Arches. Love it. Arches is considered the best paper. It's the most versatile, it can handle the most layers, but recently I have been preferring the Cardi. It might be because the Arches is so expensive that I really don't use it much. And I also made a video where we compared Arches paper with Fabriano Artistico. I'll leave that one down below if you want to see. There's also a wild card 100% cotton, and that's the Strathmore 500. I've actually finished this twice. This one and a smaller one, and I've already made a whole video comparing the pros and cons of this one. That video is down below in the description. It's a really good sketchbook to try out. Now, moving on to the non 100% cotton. First up is the Moleskine. I hated this. This is the watercolor sketchbook and I really didn't like it. I made a whole video on it. This is just a cheap one from Temu, and I do think there's a place for these. If you just want to experiment and try out little techniques, absolutely use one of these. This is my new plein air sketchbook. It's a really cheap one that I got from Hobbycraft. It's really student grade. The back has a different texture to the front. So yes, go for the cheaper sketchbooks. You don't need an expensive one outside because it's probably going to get ruined by sand and rain. Next up are the Royal Talens Art Creations. This one has the iconic yellow paper that I really didn't like. It wasn't too bad, honestly. It was about £3–4. It's pretty good for a cheap sketchbook. It doesn't handle watercolor great, but if you're not fussed and you're just looking for a fun little sketchbook, you get a lot of pages for the money. I then got this really pretty one. Has the white paper. I used it for Peachtober. I used it for the 100 Heads challenge, which you might have seen on my channel. The paper is really warped, not a huge fan. Great for doodles, great for sketches, but I wouldn't do an art challenge. I wouldn't do anything really good in here. I didn't mind doing the 100 Heads because I knew that these weren't going to be scanned, and it was more expensive than it should have been. Next up is Stillman & Burn. This is the Alpha. This is pretty similar to the Strathmore, but it's not 100% cotton. A lot of transfer. I actually did quite like using this one. The Beta. I did not enjoy using this one. The pages are so thick, unnecessarily thick. A lot of people like this sketchbook, but I wasn't a fan. Like, it's so thick, I can't even like bend it. Just because the paper's thick doesn't mean it's good quality. It needs to be more than that. Cardi is the thinnest paper and it's the best. Then we've got the Cansons. This is the mixed media one that we covered because I just don't like using the sketchbook and kind of hoped that that would make me use it, but it hasn't worked so far. This is the watercolor one. This one has a much more subtle texture and I think this one is going to be a lot more fun to use. The mixed media one has this really awful texture, so I actually preferred using the back back more because it was smoother. The texture is literally just lines, and I'm not a fan of that look. There's also a lot of transfer. If you can cope with all the lines, it's probably fine, but I prefer a much more subtle texture, so I use the back more. Even for the price, I wouldn't recommend that one. I would say get this one onto drawing papers. Personally, I think the thickness and quality that you go for drawing really depends on how many layers you plan to use. I have a lot of messy sketchbooks. These are super cheap, own brand drawing sketchbooks, and these are absolutely fine for what I need. They are thumbnailing, they are really quick doodles, and this is absolutely fine. But if you're planning on using lots of layers, maybe something like the Ohuhu could be better. This is the mixed media pad that I covered up, and I used it for Inktober. It was pretty okay for pen, but it was not great for watercolor. Like watercolor, it was not really mixed media. I think the Ohuhus are only good for pen, and I've also got the marker pad here. I think it looks pretty good. And if you're just doodling, feel free to get the cheap sketchbooks. The last one I have is the New Daily Doodle Diary, which is a Hobonichi, and for this one we're using loads of different mediums, and honestly it's handled it pretty well, so I'm really excited to keep going with that. But we've also got some notable mentions. First up, the Caran d'Ache Neocolors. It's the 15 starter set, I believe. And honestly, this is a really good set to find out if you like it or not. I went for the Neocolor 2 aquarelles. These are the water soluble ones. So if you have like a water brush, you can just add a little bit of water to it, and they kind of work like watercolor, maybe a little bit closer to gouache because they're quite opaque. I would go for the aquarelles because it's kind of like a 2-in-1. I think you get your money's worth a little bit more. They are really good, and I actually picked up a huge set from Facebook Marketplace. You might have seen this in a Daily Doodle Diary episode where we went to pick it up, and look at all of these. I actually got the huge 84 set, I think it is, for like £35, so that was really cool. But I never would have got these if I hadn't have got the small set first and figured out that I liked them. Another one is this. This is the Derwent Super Point Sharpener, I believe it is. This is really good. Also, I've got some erasers. This Faber-Castell kneaded eraser is really good. Make sure you go for this instead of a putty rubber, because it's so much more flexible, and this is perfect for watercolor because it won't damage your paper if you gently dab away like that. But recently I've also been loving this. It's just a soft eraser, and I really like this as a middle ground between a normal eraser and the kneaded one. If I'm using soft paper but I need a slightly more tough eraser, this is the one that I'll go for. I do have some soft pastels and oil pastels, very cheap watercolor pencils, but I really don't have much experience with those. But anyway, I hope that you found this helpful. Please make sure to give it a like if you have, and I hope to see you back here in a few days' time with a new video. Bye bye.